The first joke about the human warship was clocked, recorded, and laughed at across 900 light-years before the ship had even finished arriving. That was the part the Kashyyyk Accord could never forgive itself for later. The laughter came first, the ship came slow. And by the time anyone stopped laughing, the slowness had already become the worst thing that had ever happened to them. The Accord measured everything in arrivals. A proper warship did not travel to a battle. It was simply present, the way a verdict is present once the law has spoken. The fast cruisers of the Tessellate fleet could fold from the edge of a system to its heart, in the time it took a slow species to draw breath. Their drives sang a clean note, and that note meant, the matter is already decided. Speed was not a tool to the Accord. Speed was virtue. Speed was proof that a mind was efficient, and efficiency was the only holiness the Accord believed in. So when the long-range listeners at Kashyyyk Spire caught the drive signature of the thing crawling toward the Varel boundary, the entire watch tier paused to be sure the instruments were not broken. The signature was wrong. It was loud where a good drive was quiet. It was hot where a good drive ran cold. And it was slow. Not slow the way a wounded ship is slow, or a cargo barge is slow. It was slow on purpose, with a kind of patience built into every meter of it, the way a stone is patient about being a stone. Watch Tier Coordinator 7 Ral pulled the numbers twice. The human vessel was crossing open space at a velocity the Accord's own engineers had abandoned as wasteful 4,000 years ago. At its current pace, the thing would reach the Varel boundary in 11 days. 11 days. A Tessellate cruiser would make the same crossing in under an hour, and consider that hour an embarrassment. 7 Ral laughed. He could not help it. He filed the contact under a classification the Accord reserved for malfunctioning machinery and primitive craft that had wandered too far from their nests. He named it, in the cold grammar of the Accord, a thing that is on its way, but will arrive too late to matter. The name spread. Other watch tiers picked it up. The slow human warship became a small, cruel amusement, passed between the spires of the Kashyyyk Accord, like a shared snack. Listeners would tune to the contact at the start of a shift just to see how little distance it had covered, and they would make a soft clicking sound that was the Accord's nearest thing to a chuckle. It moved 11,000 kilometers while they watched. It moved another 11,000. It did not deviate. It did not accelerate. It came on, holding one straight line toward the boundary, as if it had all the time that had ever existed, and intended to spend every second of it on the same heading. There was a betting pool. 7 Ral did not start it, but he placed a wager, because everyone did. The Accord did not gamble for amusement, which it considered wasteful, but it did stake small efficiencies on outcomes, the way a precise mind stakes its confidence on a thing it is sure of. The pool was simple. It tracked the day on which the slow ship would give up and turn around. Most of the watch tier picked the third day. A few cynics picked the fifth. 7 Ral, who fancied himself a reader of primitive psychology, picked the second, because he reasoned that a species too foolish to build a fast ship was surely too foolish to commit to a long one, and would lose its nerve the moment a real Accord vessel appeared. He was wrong about every part of that, and the pool was never paid out, because before the wager came due, there was no one left in a mood to collect. Nobody at Kashyyyk Spire learned the ship's name for a long while. The humans were not broadcasting it. The Accord, in its certainty, did not think the name worth the effort of asking. A thing too slow to matter does not need to be addressed. You simply wait for it to be late, and then you forget it. The ship's name was the Long Toll. It was a Bell-class monitor, and the humans who built it had made it slow on purpose, the way you make an anvil heavy on purpose, the way you make a seawall thick on purpose. Speed was the first thing the human navy had taken out of the design, because speed was the first thing they had decided they would not need. What they had put in instead, the Accord would spend the next 11 days failing to imagine. On the bridge of the long toll, the sailing master kept her hand flat on the helm plate and watched the same star slide a finger width across the forward glass over the course of a full shift. Her name was Eunice Calloway, and she had spent 14 years learning to love a ship that refused to hurry. She had been young and fast once, in fast little ships, the kind the human navy had built when it still thought it could win the way everyone else won. She had flown corvettes that could turn inside a missile's arc. She had survived 3 engagements where survival meant being somewhere else by the time the enemy's shot arrived. She had been good at being elsewhere. And she had watched, twice, the way being elsewhere was not enough. The way a fast ship, that is fast, is still only one fast ship, and how the galaxy had so very many fast ships of its own. The first time she had run, it had worked, and she had felt nothing but the cold relief of survival. The second time she had run, the man in the Corvette beside her had run a half-second later, because his drive was a half-second slower, and the galaxy did not forgive half-seconds. She had carried that half-second for 14 years. It had taught her something the fast Navy never wanted to admit, which was that a contest of speed has no floor. There is always something faster. You can be the second fastest thing in the dark and die exactly as completely as the slowest. The human Navy had learned that lesson the hard way, in fleets, and then it had done something the rest of the galaxy found unthinkable. It had stopped trying to be fast. It had decided, in a long, cold room full of people who had buried too many crews, that if it could not win the race, it would refuse to run the race at all. It would build something that did not need to arrive first. It would build something that, once it decided to be somewhere, could not be made to leave. The Long Toll was the third ship of that decision, and Inez Calloway had asked for the helm of it the day the keel was laid. She had a low voice and a flat way of speaking that made nervous officers calm, and calm officers nervous. She did not raise her voice on a bridge. She had learned, on the fast ships, that the people who shouted were the people who had run out of plan. On the Long Toll there was always plan. The whole ship was plan, welded into a shape and given a slow heart, and the plan was very simple, and it never changed. Go to the place, stand in the place. Do not leave the place until the thing that needed doing is done. Captain Owen Price came onto the bridge at the change of the watch and stood beside her without speaking for a while, which was his way. He was an old man for the Navy, with gray in his close-cut hair and a stillness to him that crews mistook for slowness until they needed him. And then they understood that he had simply been waiting, the way the whole ship was always waiting. He looked at the star sliding its finger width across the glass. He looked at the long, quiet readouts that said the Long Toll was exactly where it should be, going exactly as fast as it meant to go, which was to say barely at all. They are laughing at us, he said. Inez Calloway did not look up from the helm plate. Yes, sir. You can hear it? I can read it. There chatters all over the low bands. They keep pinging us to see how far we've come. A small movement at the corner of her mouth that was not quite a smile. There's a wager on when we turn around. The popular pick is the third day. Price made a low sound that might have been amusement, in a man who used amusement sparingly. And when do we turn around? We don't, sir. No, he agreed. We don't. He looked at the long road on the glass, the same road they had been on since the keel was laid, the same road they would be on for 11 more days. Let them laugh the whole way in. A thing that's laughing isn't running. A thing that's laughing has decided it's safe, and a thing that's decided it's safe will stand right where we need it to be. He set his hand on the back of the helm chair, not on her, just near her, the way a captain stands close to the one person on the ship whose hands actually move the thing. "How long?" he asked, though he knew. 11 days to the boundary," she said. "Then however long they want to take after that." "They'll want to take no time at all," Price said. "That's the whole trouble with them. They've forgotten how to take time. They think time is something that happens to slower people." He was quiet a moment. "We're going to give them more time than they've had in 4,000 years. We're going to give them so much time they choke on it." He turned to go, and stopped, and said the thing he always said before a long approach, quiet enough that only she would hear it. "Steady on, sailing master. We are exactly as slow as we mean to be." "Steady on, sir," she answered. And the long toll came on toward the laughing empire, at the pace of a thing that has already decided how the story ends, and is simply walking the distance to get there. On the fourth day, the Cassock Accord decided the joke was getting stale, and sent a cruiser to end it. The cruiser was the Quill of Varel, and it was a beautiful thing by any measure the Accord respected. It was thin and silver, and almost without mass, a blade of a ship that had been designed to spend as little of itself as possible on existing. It folded the 4-day gap the human ship had taken to cross, and was beside the long toll in the space of 40 minutes, and the way it arrived was the way the Accord arrived at everything, all at once, finished before it began. Sub-Coordinator Hesvorn commanded the Quill, and he had requested the duty personally. There was a kind of officer in the Accord who collected stories, and Hesvorn wanted the story of being the one who had swatted the slow thing. He pictured how it would be told. The human crawler, 11 days from a boundary it would never reach, ended in a single pass by a ship that did not even slow down to do it. He brought the Quill alongside the long toll at a distance the Accord considered polite for an execution, and he looked at the human ship on his displays, and for the first time, some small cold part of him stopped composing the story. The long toll was ugly. That was the first thing. After a lifetime of Accord vessels, which were made beautiful, because beauty was efficient, and efficiency was beauty, the human ship looked like something that had been hammered rather than designed. It was a long, blunt slab of a hull, dark and unlovely, with no grace to it anywhere. Where an Accord ship tapered, the long toll simply stopped, a flat slammed shut end like the face of a cliff. And it was big, not big the way a carrier is big, full of empty bays and folded craft. It was big the way a mountain is big, big all the way through, big with the kind of bigness that is just more ship, more metal, more of whatever the dark slab was full of, layer after layer of it, packed in so tight that the Quill's scanners kept reporting the same wrong answer, and Hesvorn kept ordering them to scan again. The answer the scanners kept giving was that the long toll had almost no empty space inside it at all. This made no sense to the Accord. A warship was mostly drive and mostly weapon, and around those two holy things, a thin shell of crew and structure, all of it kept as light as it could be made, because mass was the enemy of speed, and speed was the only thing that mattered. A ship that was solid all the way through was a ship that had given up on moving. It was, by every rule Hesvorn had ever learned, a ship that had chosen to be a target. He decided that was exactly what it was, a target the humans had built and forgotten to make mobile. He let himself smile, which the Accord could do, in its way, and he opened a channel to the slow ship, because the story would be better if there were words in it. "Human vessel," he sent, in the Accord's flat trade tongue, "you are 11 days from a boundary you will not reach. You are slow past the point of meaning. We have come to remove you from a path you were never going to finish. There is no shame in being deleted before you arrive. You were always going to arrive too late. Stand down your systems, and the removal will be efficient." The reply took its time. Everything about the human ship took its time. When it came in the same trade tongue, in a low voice that did not sound afraid, and did not sound brave either, which unsettled Hesvorn more than either would have. "This is the Monitor Long Toll," the voice said. "You're early." Hesvorn waited for more. There was no more. The channel simply held, open and patient. A door, left standing open by someone who was not worried about who walked through it. "Early," he repeated. He found he disliked the word. "We are not early. You are slow. We are correct." "You're early," the voice said again, with no heat in it, "because we hadn't decided to start yet. Now we have. Thank you for that." And the long toll, for the first time in 4 days, did something other than crawl forward in a straight line. It turned, not quickly. Nothing the human ship did was quick, but it brought its flat, blunt face around toward the Quillaveral with a slow inevitability that Hesvorn would later describe, in the report he barely survived to file, as the most frightening thing he had ever watched, because it was so clearly not a reaction. It was a decision. The slow ship had decided to look at him, and it was taking exactly as long to look at him as it intended to take, and there was nothing in the galaxy he could do to make it look at him any faster or any slower than it chose. Hesvorn did the correct thing. He fired. The Quillaveral carried Lancefire, the Accord's pride, a weapon of such surgical speed that it crossed the gap between the two ships, before the human sensors should have even registered the discharge. 3 lances, threaded to strike the drive, the bridge, and the spine, the 3 places where an efficient ship kept its life. It was a perfect shot. Hesvorn had fired it 100 times in his career, and it had never once failed to delete what it touched. The lances struck the long toll, and the long toll did not notice. That was how it looked to the Quill's crew, and that was how Hesvorn felt it in the cold center of himself. The 3 lances hit the dark slab of the human hull and simply stopped, the way rain stops on stone, the way a shout stops in a deep wood. There was no flare of a shield overloading. There was no breach. The lances went into the outer skin of the long toll, and the long toll absorbed them, the way a mountain absorbs a thrown pebble, with a small, dull patience that suggested it could absorb a great many more, and was a little bored already. Now Hesvorn understood the bigness. He understood the solid hull, and the wrong scans, and the mass the humans had refused to remove. The long toll was not slow because it had failed to be fast. It was slow because every gram of speed had been traded, deliberately and coldly, for this. For armor that ate lancefire like weather. For a hull so thick and so dense and so layered that the Accord's holiest weapon could not find a single place to matter. The humans had not given up on winning. They had given up on the kind of winning the Accord understood, and built a different kind, and dragged it across 11 days of open space to show him. Hesvorn ordered a second volley, and a third. The Quillaveral poured its lancefire into the long toll for 90 seconds, which was an eternity for a ship that thought in fractions of a second, and at the end of it, the human ship had a scorched patch on its flat face, the size of a small moon, and not one system out of place. The long toll fired back once. The Accord had no good word for the weapon, because the Accord had never built anything like it, because the weapon was slow. It was a single shot, and it was massive, and it did not race across the gap the way a lance did. It crossed the distance, the way the whole ship crossed distance, with weight, with patience, with the awful certainty of a thing that does not need to hurry, because it is going to arrive regardless. The Quill's crew saw it leave the human gun. They had time to see it. That was the horror of it. An Accord weapon was over before you knew it had begun. The human weapon gave you time, a long, terrible second of time, to watch it come and understand exactly what it was, and know precisely that you could not get out of its way. Hess-Vorn ordered an evasion fold. The quill of Varel was the fastest thing for 900 light-years, and it began to fold, and it was not fast enough. Because for once, the contest was not about being fast. The human shell did not have to catch the quill. It only had to be where the quill was going to be. And a ship that thinks slowly thinks ahead, and the long toll had aimed not at where the quill was, but at where the quill, being the quill, would obviously try to go. The shell took the cruiser amidships as it tried to leave. The beautiful thin silver blade of a ship, the pride of the Varel watch, folded around the shell like paper around a fist, and came apart in a long, slow blossom of light. And Hess-Vorn's last clear thought, riding the one escape pod that the human gunners chose to let live, was that the slow ship had not even turned to follow the kill. It had simply put its blunt face back on its original heading and resumed its crawl toward the boundary, as if the quill of Varel had been a small thing on a long road, stepped over and already forgotten. Hess-Vorn's pod drifted, and his sensors, still working, watched the long toll dwindle into the dark at the pace of a thing that has nowhere to be but everywhere to arrive. The story he had come to make was not the story he carried home. The story he carried home was that the slow human warship could not be killed by the fastest, finest weapon the Kasich Accord possessed, and that it was still coming, 11 days out, and now 10, and that it had let him live so that he would tell them. He understood, drifting in the cold, that this was deliberate. The slow ship could have folded his pod with a flick of a gun. It had let him live the way you leave one witness alive at a crime, not from mercy, but because a witness is more useful than a corpse. The long toll wanted the Accord to know. It was not killing its way to the spire. It was teaching its way there, one survivor at a time, and Hess-Vorn was the first lesson, and he hated that he could feel the truth of it in him, as his pod limped home. The pod took 6 days to reach the nearest Accord spire. 6 slow days, the slowest of Hess-Vorn's life, and that was its own cruelty and its own lesson. He had spent his career arriving everywhere in an instant. Now he drifted, helpless, at the mercy of the same slowness he had laughed at, and he had nothing to do for 6 days but watch the long tolls heading on his pod's failing sensors, and understand, hour by hour, that the slow ship was gaining on him, not in speed, in certainty. He would reach the spire first, but the slow ship would reach it after, and it would still be coming when he got there, and it would still be coming when he was old. And there was nothing he could do in his fast little pod to change a single meter of where it was going. By the time the pod was recovered, the story Hess-Vorn carried had already changed shape inside him. He had set out to tell the Accord that the slow ship was strong. By the end of the drift, he understood that strength was not the frightening part. Many things were strong. The frightening part was the patience. A strong thing that hurries can be tired out, drawn off, made to spend itself. The long toll would never spend itself, because it was never in a hurry to be anywhere but exactly where it already was. You could not exhaust a thing that was not trying to win quickly. You could not wait out a thing that had more patience than you had time. He tried to put that in his report, and the words would not come, because the Accord had no words for it. And that absence of words was the first crack in the Empire's confidence, the place where the slow ship had already gotten inside before it ever reached the boundary. The watch-tiers read his report and felt the crack widen in themselves, and they did the only thing they knew how to do with a fear they could not name. They reached for the fast answer. They reached for more ships. On the bridge of the long toll, Ines Calloway logged the engagement in 4 short lines and felt nothing she would have called triumph. She had watched the quill come apart. She had aimed the shell, or rather she had set the heading, and the gunnery officer had set the rest. And between them, They had put the slow round exactly where a fast ship would flee. It was not hard. Fast ships were predictable, in the way that frightened things are predictable. They always ran toward the open space, and a monitor's whole art was to know, long before the running started, which open space the frightened thing would choose. "They'll send more," she said. Captain Price stood at the rail behind her, watching the scorch mark readings come back from the hull. The lance damage was real but shallow, a few meters bitten out of armor that was hundreds of meters thick in the places that mattered. The repair crews had not even been roused. The long toll healed the way it did everything, slowly, and it had not yet decided the wound was worth the bother. "They'll send more," Price agreed. "And they'll send them faster, because they think the answer to slow is fast. They always do. The galaxy's been trying to outrun us for 60 years. He came forward and stood beside her, and looked at the long empty road on the forward glass. "We don't outrun, we outlast. We just have to be harder to remove than they are patient." "They're not patient at all," Ines said. "No," Price said, and there was the ghost of grim satisfaction in it. "They're not. That's the whole gift of them. We brought the one thing they sold off to make themselves quick. We brought time, and now we're going to spend it on them, every second, all the way to their door." He looked at the boundary marker, 10 days out and unmoving on the chart. "Hold the heading, sailing master." "Holding, sir," Ines Calloway said, and the slow warship came on. The crew of the long toll lived the way the ship lived, which was slowly, and on purpose. There were 400 of them in the great solid hull, and they were not like the crews of fast ships, who lived a few hot, frightened hours at a time, and then went home. The people of the long toll signed for years. They had to. A monitor's whole life was the long approach and the long hold, and the Navy had learned that you could not crew such a ship with people who hated waiting. You had to find the rare ones who could sit inside a slow thing for months and not come apart. The ones who found impatience, not boredom, but a kind of peace. There was a young rating named Cale Brenner, 19, on his first long crossing, who had nearly washed out of monitor school for the worst reason there was, which was that he could not stop hurrying. He counted the days out loud until an older hand taught him to stop. He paced the gun decks until his boots wore a shine in the deck plate. On the third day of the crossing, he had asked the sailing master, in the mess, how she stood it, the slowness. The same star sliding its finger width across the glass shift after shift after shift. Ines Calloway had thought about it for a while, because she did not give fast answers, and then she had told him the thing that the old hands told all the young ones, the thing that was the whole secret of the ship. "You're thinking about it wrong," she said. "You think slow is the waiting, and fast is the doing. It isn't. Out there, the fast ones, they spend their whole lives running, and they never get anywhere, because there's always something faster behind them. We're not waiting, Cale. We're the only ones who already arrived. We decided where we were going, and we're going there, and nothing in the galaxy can make us be somewhere else. That's not waiting. That's the most certain thing a person can ever feel. Once you feel it, you'll never want to be fast again." Cale Brenner had not understood her on the third day. He understood her on the 9th, standing at his post when the wall died, watching 800 fast ships flee in every direction and find the slow ship waiting in all of them. He understood that the fast ones, for all their speed, had never once in 4,000 years felt the thing he felt standing on the deck of the long toll, which was the calm of a person who is exactly where he means to be, and cannot be moved, and is not afraid. He stopped pacing after that. He had found the floor the sailing master had told him about. There was no floor in being fast. There was a floor in standing still. 3 days later, the cassock Accord stopped laughing entirely. and started doing the thing it did when it was afraid, which was to count. The Accord loved counting. Counting was efficient. When the quill of Veril did not return, and Hesvorn's pod was recovered with its dreadful story, the Kasich Spire did not panic, because the Accord did not believe in panic, which is a slow species word for a fast species refusal to admit fear. Instead, it gathered numbers. It calculated the long toll's mass from the scan failures, and found the number frightening. It calculated the energy the human shell must have carried to fold the quill at that range, and found the number more frightening. It calculated how many lance strikes the human hull had eaten, and divided that by the damage observed, and arrived at a number that the watch tier coordinators read 3 times, and then quietly classified above their own clearance. The number was 400. It meant that, at the rate the quill had damaged it, 400 cruisers would be required merely to scratch the long toll through to anything vital, and that was assuming the 400 could fire continuously, which they could not, and assuming the slow ship would let them, which it would not. There was a council, after the number was read. The Accord did not hold councils often, because deliberation was slow and slowness was waste, but the 400 number had frightened the watch tiers badly enough that the high coordinators of 3 spires folded together into one chamber to decide what the slow ship was and what was to be done about it. 7th Ral was summoned to speak, because he had watched the contact longer than anyone, and he stood before the high coordinators and tried to explain a thing the Accord had no words for. "It does not behave like a weapon," he said. "A weapon wants to strike and leave. This wants only to arrive. It does not maneuver. It does not feint. It has held one heading for 7 days, and it will hold it for 4 more, and at the end of those 4 days, it will be exactly where it said it would be on the first day, which is here, with us." "Then we will not be here," said the highest of the coordinators, a vast old mind named Orsil Vane, who had ruled the Veril Watch for 200 years. "We are the fastest people in 900 light years. We do not need to be anywhere we do not wish to be. Let the slow thing arrive at an empty boundary and crawl in circles forever." "That was my thought also," 7 Ral said, and then he said the thing he had not meant to say, the thing that had been sitting in him since the wall. "But I keep returning to a question I cannot answer. It knows we are faster. It has always known. It built itself slow on purpose, in full knowledge that everything it would ever face could outrun it. And it came anyway. A thing does not cross 900 light years at a crawl. Into a people it knows can simply leave, unless it has already solved the leaving. I do not know how it has solved the leaving, but I no longer believe it has not." The chamber was quiet for a long Accord moment, which is a very short while by slower measure, and in that quiet, Orsil Vane felt, for the first time in 200 years of rule, the cold specific fear of a fast mind that has met a slow plan it cannot see the end of. "Build the wall," Orsil Vane said at last, because the Accord, frightened, did the thing the Accord always did. "If we cannot understand it, we will overwhelm it. Understanding is slow, overwhelming is fast. We are fast." And so the council ended the way every Accord deliberation ended, with the fast answer, because the fast answer was the only answer the Accord still knew how to give. And then the Accord did the thing the Accord always did when a number frightened it. It multiplied. If one cruiser could not remove the slow ship, then the answer was more cruisers. If the human hull could eat the lance fire of 1 quill, then it could be made to choke on the lance fire of 40. Speed had not failed, the watch tiers told one another. Speed had simply been applied in insufficient quantity. The Accord had 800 warships within a fold of the Veril boundary, and it began, with cold efficient haste, to gather them into a wall. The wall had a name in the Accord's grammar. It was the kind of formation the Accord built when it intended not merely to win, but to make winning a lesson, a thing other species could study and learn never to approach. 40 cruisers in the first rank, 60 heavier vessels behind, and behind those, the slow, heavy throne ships that the Accord almost never moved, because moving them was wasteful, and which it was moving now. They built the wall across the Varel boundary, directly on the heading the long toll had held for 7 straight days, without the smallest deviation. They built it where the human ship was going, because the human ship had told them, with 7 days of perfect straight-line honesty, exactly where it meant to go. And here was the thing the Accord could not stop itself from noticing, the small, cold splinter that worked its way into the smooth confidence of the watch-tiers as the wall assembled. The long toll knew the wall was being built. It had to know. Its sensors had marked the quill from 4 days out. It could surely mark 800 ships gathering directly in its path. A fast species, seeing a wall of 800 warships assembling exactly where it was headed, would have changed course. Would have looped, feinted, sought a weak flank, done any of the 1,000 clever fast things that fast species did. The long toll changed nothing. It held the heading. It held the pace. It came on toward the wall at the same slow, patient crawl it had held since the first day, neither faster in fear nor slower in caution, as if 800 warships were not a wall at all, but simply more of the road, and the road was the road, and the slow ship would walk every meter of it the same way it had walked the rest. 7 Ral, the same coordinator who had laughed first, watched the contact crawl toward the wall he had helped to build, and found that he was not laughing now, and that he could not quite remember what about it had ever seemed funny. There was something in the unbroken straightness of the human heading that had stopped being slow and started being something else, something patient, something that had looked at 800 warships and decided they did not change anything, and was correct. He pulled the numbers one more time, the way he had on the first day. The long toll would reach the wall in 3 days. 3 days, holding straight, into the largest formation the Varel watch had assembled in 1,000 years. "It is still coming," he reported, and he heard his own voice do something it had never done in his career. It dropped. It went quiet. It went, though he would have died before admitting the word, slow. "Yes," said the coordinator above him, watching the same contact. "It is still coming. We built a wall, and it did not even turn its head." And on the chart, the slow human warship crossed another 11,000 kilometers toward the place where 800 ships were waiting to be patient at, and were not. The long toll reached the wall at the start of the human ship's morning watch, and it did not slow down to meet it. That detail mattered more than anything else that happened that day, and the Accord would argue about it for a generation afterward. A ship approaching certain death is supposed to do something at the threshold. It is supposed to flinch, to break, to fire early, to spend its first shots in the long-range hope of thinning the wall before the wall can close. The long toll did none of these things. It crossed into lance range of 800 warships, at exactly the same pace it had held for 9 days. And the only change anyone aboard could see on the forward glass was that the dark in front of them had filled up with silver. Ines Calloway had her hand flat on the helm plate. She had not moved it in 2 hours. The whole approach had been the simplest piloting of her life, a single unwavering line, and that was the point, and she felt the rightness of it in her bones. The fast ships she had flown long ago had taught her that the hardest thing in a fight was to do nothing the enemy expected. The long toll had spent 9 days teaching the Casic Accord to expect a straight line, and now it was going to give them one straight line more, and the Accord had built its entire wall on the assumption that 9 days of honesty was a weakness. It was not a weakness. It was a lure with no hook in it, which is the only kind a clever enemy will swallow whole. Captain Price stood at the rail and watched the wall fill the glass and said, without raising his voice, the order the whole ship had been built to obey: stand in the place. The long toll stopped. It did not slew or skid or flare its drive. It simply ceased forward motion the way a dropped anchor ceases, all at once and completely, and sat in the dark exactly at the lip of the wall, one ship, blunt and dark and unbeautiful, facing 800. And then it did the thing the Accord had no defense against, because the Accord had never imagined a ship would choose to do it. It planted itself, and it refused to be anywhere else. The wall opened fire. 40 cruisers in the first rank loosed lance fire as one, and behind them 60 heavier ships added their guns, and the slow ship at the lip of the wall vanished inside a storm of light that the Accord's own gunners would remember as the brightest thing they had ever made. They poured it on. They had learned from the Quill of Veril that one volley would not do, so they did not stop at one. They held the storm for a full minute, then two, 800 ships emptying themselves into a single dark slab, and the watch-tiers far behind the wall watched their displays white out and told one another, with the first real hope they had felt in days, that nothing could survive that no hull was that thick, that the slow thing was surely gone. The storm faded. The long toll was still there. It had a fresh field of scorch across its blunt face, and 3 shallow craters in its flank, where the heaviest of the throne ship guns had bitten deep, and it had lost nothing that mattered, and it had not moved a single meter. It sat at the lip of the wall exactly where it had planted itself, dark and patient, and now, somehow, more frightening than when it had been moving, because a moving thing can be fled, and a planted thing simply waits for you to run out of ways to make it leave. Deep inside the long toll, in a chamber the Accord could not have imagined, the damage crews finally stirred. Chief Armorer Bryn Vale walked the inner gun decks with a slow, steady step, reading the heat off the great barrels with the flat of his hand, the way an old smith reads a forge, and he was not hurried, because nothing on the long toll was hurried, and he called the slow round cycle up to the bridge in a voice as level as a man counting stairs. The ship had eaten the largest barrage in the Veril Watch's history, and Bryn Vale's chief concern was whether the number 3 rammer was seating cleanly, which it was, and so he reported the ship sound and went back to reading heat off iron, while above him, the wall began to die. Because then the long toll began to fire, and the Accord learned what the slow ship had been carrying inside all that solid mass it had refused to trade for speed. It was guns. It was guns nearly all the way through. The bigness the scans had found, the dense, impossible solidness, the absence of empty space, all of it was guns, and the slow, heavy shells the guns ate. The long toll was not a warship with weapons aboard it. It was a weapon with just enough ship wrapped around it to keep the crew alive, and the humans had spent 9 days letting the Accord believe that slow meant small, that a thing that crawled could not also be a thing that ended worlds. The first human shell did not race. None of them ever raced. The Accord watched it leave the slow gun with that same terrible second of warning, and the first-rank cruiser it was aimed at had time to know, fully and completely, what was coming, and time to try to fold away, and the shell was already aimed at where folding would take it, and it folded the cruiser into wreckage the way the Quill had folded. Then the second shell, then the third. The long toll did not fire fast, because it did not need to fire fast. It fired certain. Every shell it sent was aimed not at where a ship was, but at where a frightened fast ship would flee, and the wall was full of frightened fast ships, and they all fled the same way, toward the open space, because that was what fast ships had always done. and the slow gunners on the long toll had spent careers learning exactly which open space a frightened thing would choose. The wall, which had been built to be patient at the slow ship, discovered that it had no idea how to be patient at all. This was the thing the Accord had sold away and forgotten it had sold. Speed had made them quick, and it had made them clever in quick ways, but it had taken something from them, slowly, over 4,000 years, and they had not noticed it going. It had taken their capacity to stand. They did not know how to be a wall that does not move. They had built the formation and named it a wall, but they were not a wall. They were 800 fast ships, briefly holding still, and the moment the slow shells began to fold them one by one, the wall remembered what it truly was, and it did what fast things do. It tried to be elsewhere, and there was no elsewhere the long toll had not already aimed at. Ines Calloway watched the wall begin to come apart, and did not feel it as a battle. A battle had two sides trying to be in the same place. This was something else. This was one side trying with all its speed to leave, and the other side standing in the doorway and folding them as they ran. The Accord cruisers broke left, and the long toll's port guns were waiting in the left. They broke right, and the starboard guns were waiting in the right. They tried to fold back through their own ranks, and folded into the heavier ships behind them, and the heavier ships, which had never been struck by anything that did not announce itself in advance, broke too. A flight of 40 cruisers, the cleverest in the wall, tried the one thing the Accord thought might work. They did not flee outward, they folded inward, all 40 at once, straight at the long toll, reasoning with the last of their cold logic that a slow ship could not aim at 40 close targets, coming from 40 angles faster than they could close the gap, and overwhelm its hull at point-blank range. It was the most Accord idea anyone had ever had, a solution made entirely of speed, and it was the only attack of the day that had a shape to it. The long toll did not even retask its main guns. It opened a thing along its flanks that the Accord had not catalogued, because the Accord had never been close enough to a monitor to learn it existed. A dense belt of short, slow throwers that did not fire shells, but flung a wall of slow, heavy mass outward in a spreading curtain, a thing that did not need to aim because it filled every angle at once, and the 40 fast cruisers folded in at their best speed, straight into a curtain that was simply, patiently, everywhere they were going. None of the 40 reached the hull. The clever attack ended as a bright ring of wreckage hanging around the slow ship like a crown, and the long toll had not turned a single one of its main guns to deal with it. The throne ships were the last to understand. They were old and proud, and they had moved for this, and they were not used to moving. And that unfamiliarity was the only thing in the whole wall that resembled what the long toll was. But it was not enough. A thing that has forgotten how to be still cannot relearn it in the middle of dying. The throne ships tried to be a wall the way the cruisers could not, and the long toll, recognizing the only ships in the formation that meant to stand, gave them its full, slow attention, and folded them where they stood. Captain Price watched it all from the rail, with an expression that no one on the bridge would have called pleasure. It was closer to the look of a man balancing an account that had been owed for 60 years. "They're running into us," he said quietly, to no one. "Every one of them. They've spent 4,000 years learning to be fast, and they can't stop being fast even to save their lives. They flee right into the only ship in the galaxy that knew they would." Ines Calloway kept her hand flat on the helm plate and held the long toll in its place, dead still, the eye of the storm it was making, and she understood now in her body what the Navy had understood in that long cold room when it gave up the race. The galaxy was full of fast ships, and fast ships could flee, and a thing that can flee can always be made to flee, and a thing that flees is a thing you can aim at. The only ship that could not be made to flee was the one that had decided, all the way down to its keel, that it would never leave. That was the worst nightmare the Accord had built the wall to face, and never imagined it would meet. Not a faster ship. There was no faster ship. The Accord owned fast. It was a ship that would not move. A ship you could not outrun, because it did not chase. A ship you could not outfold, because it did not fold. A ship that picked a single point in the dark and made that point the most dangerous place in the galaxy, and then waited, with all the patience the Accord had thrown away, for the galaxy to come and break itself against the point. The wall took 19 minutes to die. The Accord, which measured everything, measured that too, and found the number unbearable, because 19 minutes was an age to a species that ended things in fractions of a second, and the slow ship had taken every one of those minutes on purpose, the way it took everything on purpose, making the Accord watch its own great wall fold one ship at a time, so that the watch-tiers far behind would have time to understand each death fully before the next one came. When it was over, the long toll had a hull scarred half the way around, and not one gun out of action, and it sat at the lip of where the wall had been, surrounded by the slow-tumbling wreck of 800 ships, and it had not moved a meter from the place it had chosen. The Accord watch-tiers, far behind, sat in a silence the Accord had no word for, because the Accord had never needed a word for the quiet that comes after a certainty dies. And then the long toll began to move again. It came off its planted point with the same slow inevitability it had shown the quill, brought its blunt scarred face back onto the heading it had held for 9 days, and resumed its crawl toward the cassock spire, 8 days out now, as if the wall had been a small thing on a long road, stepped over and already behind it. It had not said a word the entire engagement. It had let the quill's survivors do the talking before, and it let the wall's survivors do the talking now, and the Accord listened helplessly, as its own broken ship sent home the thing the watch-tiers least wanted to hear. The slow ship was still coming. It had eaten the wall the way it had eaten the cruiser, slowly, completely, without hurry, and without mercy, and it had not even been made to change its heading. 8 days out, and now 7, holding straight, coming on. On the bridge of the long toll, Captain Price gave the order he always gave when a thing was done and the next thing was not yet here. "Steady on, sailing master." "Steady on, sir," Ines Calloway said, and held the slow warship straight toward the throat of the Empire that had laughed at it for 9 days, and was not laughing now. 8 days out, with the wreck of the wall behind it, the long toll met the one Accord weapon that had not yet been spent on it, and the meeting taught the Accord the last thing it would learn before the end. The Accord had a class of vessel it almost never built, because the class was wasteful, and waste was the only true sin the Accord recognized. It was called a verifier, and it was the slowest thing the Accord owned, which is to say, it was still faster than the long toll, by a margin the Accord found comfortable, but slow by Accord measure. A heavy, careful ship, whose whole purpose was to come close to a thing and be sure of it. The Accord built 3 verifiers in 1,000 years. It sent one of them now, alone, because the watch-tiers had decided that the problem was not the slow ship's strength but their own ignorance of it, and that if they could only measure the human ship exactly, truly, all the way down, then somewhere in the measurement would be the seam, the flaw, the one place where speed could still be made to matter. The verifier was named the Patient Accounting, and its commander, a careful old officer called Tev Aramun, was the first mind in the Accord to approach the human ship without contempt. He had read every record. He had read Hesvorn's report, and the wall's death, and the 400 number, and the silence that came after a certainty died. He came in slow, slower than any Accord ship had ever moved on purpose, holding his fire, holding his fear, with every instrument the verifier owned open, and reaching toward the dark, blunt slab that had eaten 800 ships and not changed its heading. And the long toll let him come. That was the thing Tev Aramun had not expected, and the thing that frightened him more than any gun. The slow ship did not fire on the verifier. It did not turn its blunt face. It held its heading and let the Accord's most careful ship creep close and measure it, all of it, the hull and the heat and the slow heart and the rows upon rows of guns packed into the mass where empty space should have been. It let itself be read. It opened, in a way a mountain opens to a climber, by simply being too large and too solid to hide anything, and it permitted the Accord to learn exactly what it was, because it had nothing left to conceal and everything left to teach. Tev Aramun read the slow ship for 2 full days, and at the end of it, he understood the human ship better than any living mind in the Accord, and the understanding broke him more gently and more completely than any shell had broken anyone. There was no seam. That was the finding. He had come to find the flaw, and there was no flaw, because the slow ship was not a fast ship that had failed to be fast. It was a whole and complete answer to a question the Accord had never thought to ask, which was, what do you build when you stop trying to win the way everyone wins? The humans had asked that question in a long, cold room, and the long toll was the answer, and the answer had no weakness in it, because it had been built by a people who had already lost every fast fight there was to lose, and had nothing left to protect but the truth of standing still. It is not hiding anything, Tev Aramun reported, and his careful old voice was steady in the way of a mind that has stopped hoping and found, underneath the hope, a strange and level calm. I have measured it completely. There is no seam. There is no place where we are faster than it is patient. It has shown me everything it is, because everything it is enough. On the bridge of the long toll, Ines Calloway watched the verifier hold close and read them, and she did not fire, and she understood why the captain had ordered her not to. He's the only one who came to learn instead of to win, she said. Captain Price nodded, watching the careful old ship hang in the dark beside them. Then he's the only one worth teaching. Let him read every plate. Let him count every gun. I want one mind in their whole empire that actually understands what we are, so that when the others tell the story wrong, there's someone who can tell it right. He was quiet a moment. We didn't come to kill them. We came to be understood. A nightmare that nobody understands is just a monster. A nightmare they understand is a lesson. We're a lesson. When Tev Aramun had read everything there was to read, the patient accounting did the only honest thing left to it. It did not flee, because it had understood, finally, that fleeing was the trap. It did not fire, because it had measured the futility of firing to the last decimal the Accord loved so well. It simply turned, slowly, the slowest turn an Accord ship had made in 1,000 years, and carried its complete and ruinous understanding home, to be the one true record in an empire that would spend the rest of its history telling the story to its young. The long toll let it go, and held its heading, and came on. For the first time in 4,000 years, the Kasich Accord tried to make itself slow. It was a clumsy, frightened thing to watch, and Seventh Ral watched all of it. The Accord had understood, finally, the shape of what was killing it. The slow ship could not be outrun, because it did not chase. It could not be outfolded, because it would not flee. Every weapon the Accord owned was a fast weapon, built to strike a thing where it was before it could be elsewhere, and the slow ship had made a virtue of being exactly where it said it would be, so that its honesty became a trap, and its patience became a wall, and its refusal to move became the single most lethal fact in the galaxy. So the watchtiers reasoned, with the cold logic that was the only God they had, that the answer to a thing that would not flee was a thing that would not flee back. If the long toll won by standing, then the Accord must learn to stand. It must build, against every instinct bred into it across 4,000 years of holy speed, a formation that did not move. It could not do it. That was the discovery that broke something in the Accord that day, deeper than any shell. They gave the order to hold position. They told the new fleet, 600 fresh ships pulled from 3 watches, to plant themselves the way the human ship planted itself, to become a wall that truly was a wall, to wait. And the ships could not do it. The crews could not do it. 4,000 years of selecting for speed, of breeding speed, of teaching every officer from hatching that to hold still, was to be deleted, had taken the standing out of them the way long ages take the eyes from cave creatures. They tried to wait, and their nerve failed. They tried to plant, and within minutes, the formation rippled and drifted, as ship after ship gave in to the old certainty in its bones, that stillness was death, and edged, and shifted, and folded a little more, until the wall that was meant to stand was once again only 600 fast ships, briefly, badly, holding still. 7 Rao filed a report on the failure, and it was the hardest report of his life, because the Accord did not have language for the thing he had to describe. He had to write that the fleet could not obey the order to be patient. He had to write that patience was a capability his civilization no longer possessed, the way a creature that has lived in the dark for 10,000 generations can be commanded to see and simply cannot. He had to write that the slow ship had not beaten the Accord with a better weapon. It had beaten the Accord with a thing the Accord had thrown away, and could not pick back up, and would have to spend 1,000 years relearning, and did not have 1,000 years, because the slow ship was 7 days out, and now 6. And the long toll came on toward a fleet that could not stop flinching. Ines Calloway saw it on the long sensors before the Accord admitted it to itself. She saw the new fleet assemble, and she saw it fail to hold, the formation crawling and rippling with the small, constant motion of frightened things. And she felt something that was almost pity, and was mostly the calm of a hunter who has watched the prey try every gate, and find them all closed. "They're trying to stand," she said. "They can't." Captain Price came to look. He studied the rippling fleet for a long while. "No," he said, "they can't. You can't learn it at the end. You learn it slow, over years, in peace, when nobody's shooting, and you build it into the keel. We've been building it into our keels for 60 years, and it nearly cost us a generation to do it. They want it in 6 days." He shook his head, not in triumph, but in something almost like a grim sympathy. "There's no fast way to learn how to be slow. That's the whole secret of us. That's the one thing they sold off that they can never buy back in time." He was quiet a while, watching the rippling fleet, and then he said the thing that Ines would remember longer than anything else from the whole crossing. "They think we're the patient ones," he said. "We're not. We're the most impatient species the galaxy ever made. We hate waiting. We hate it. That's why we built her." He nodded at the deck under their feet, at the slow ship around them. "We were so impatient with being faster and dying anyway that we got off the wheel entirely. The patience isn't in us. We poured it into the ship. We made the ship so it never has to wait twice, so it gets there once, and stands forever, and then we get to stop running. That's not patience, sailing master. That's just a tired people who finally built a place to stand. The Accord, finding it could not stand, did the only thing left to a species that had built its soul on speed. It decided to run. Not in defeat. The Accord would never have called it that. It called it a withdrawal to a more efficient line, a redeployment to a position of advantage, and what it meant was that the Kasich Spire itself, the heart world of the Accord with its 900 million minds, would fold away from the slow ship's path and leave the human warship to crawl forever toward a throat that was no longer there. They began to evacuate the spire. The greatest fold engines in the Accord's possession spun up to move the heart world itself off the slow ship's heading, and the watch-tiers told one another that this was wisdom, that you do not stand against a thing that cannot be moved. You simply cease to be where it is going. They felt clever again, for the first time in days. They had remembered what they were good at. They were good at not being where the slow thing was. And then the long toll, 6 days out, did the thing it had not done once in the entire approach. It changed course. 7 Ral nearly fell from his station when the contact's heading shifted. 9 days it had held one straight line, through a cruiser and through a wall and through everything the Accord had thrown, and the watch-tiers had built their entire understanding of the slow ship on its terrible honesty, on the certainty that it went only where it pointed. And now, the moment the spire began to fold away, the slow ship turned, smoothly and slowly, and without the smallest hesitation, onto the exact new heading the heart world had chosen for its escape. It had known. That was the splinter that went all the way in. The long toll had held its straight line for 9 days, not because it could not turn, but because it had no reason to. It had been walking toward where the spire was. And the instant the spire decided to be somewhere else, the slow ship simply pointed at the somewhere else, with the calm of a thing that had read the whole shape of the Accord's fear long ago, and had been waiting, patiently, for the Accord to do the one predictable thing a fast species does when it is finally, truly afraid. It runs, and a thing that runs is a thing you can aim at. It turned, 7 Ral said into the watch channel, and his voice had gone all the way to the bottom of itself. It turned with the spire. It is following the heart world. It cannot follow the heart world, said the coordinator above him. It is too slow. The spire will fold 1,000 light years in an hour. The slow thing will take a year to cross the same gap. We will be gone. And that was true. And that was the trap. And Ines Calloway had seen it before any of them. Because the spire could fold 1,000 light years in an hour, but it could only fold to a place, and a place was a heading, and a heading was honesty. The same honesty the Accord had punished the slow ship for, and never understood it could be punished for itself. To move the heart world, the Accord had to choose a destination, and commit 900 million minds to it. And once it had chosen, the destination was fixed, was honest, was as straight and unchangeable as the line the long toll had held for 9 days. And the long toll did not need to catch the spire on the way. It only needed to be at the destination first. The slow ship's guns reached farther than the Accord had ever measured, because the Accord measured everything by speed, and a slow shell that does not lose energy to haste carries that energy a very long way. The long toll planted itself one more time, on the new heading, and it did not chase the folding heart world across the dark. It simply aimed at the place the spire had committed to, the honest fixed point the Accord could no longer change, without abandoning 900 million minds mid-fold. And it began, with terrible slow patience, to fire. The shells took an hour to cross the gap. That was the most frightening hour in the history of the Kasich Accord. They could see the shells coming. They had time, a full hour of time, the very thing they had sold away and despised, to watch the slow rounds cross the dark toward the place their heart world was folding to, and to understand that they could not change the destination without unfolding 900 million minds into open space, and to know, with perfect efficient clarity, that the slow ship had given them this hour on purpose. It wanted them to watch. It wanted them to have the time. It wanted the Accord, which had thrown time away, to spend one last hour drowning in all the time it had ever refused, watching the slow, inevitable thing come on. It was the cruelest thing the Long Toll did in the whole 11 days, and it never fired a single one of those shells to kill. Inez Calloway aimed every one of them wide, by a margin so deliberate it was almost gentle, into the empty dark beside the destination, near enough to be seen, near enough to be understood, never near enough to harm. She wanted the Accord to feel the hour. She did not want to take the 900 million mines. The Navy had not sent the Long Toll to commit a slaughter. It had sent it to end a war, and a war ends fastest when the enemy chooses to be ended, and the enemy will only choose that when it has spent one full unbearable hour learning, in its bones, the exact size of the mercy it is being offered. The Accord broke before the shells even passed. It did the only thing left. It unfolded. It abandoned the destination, scattered the heart world's escape into 1,000 desperate, uncommitted vectors. 900 million minds flung into a dozen panic headings at once. Because anything, was better than holding the honest line into the place where the slow shells were going. The great efficient fold of the Cassock spire dissolved into chaos, the most inefficient thing the Accord had done in 4,000 years. Fast ships fleeing in every direction with no plan and no formation, fleeing the way frightened fast things flee, scattering into all the open dark. And the Long Toll, planted and patient, watched them scatter, and did not fire on a single one. That was the thing the Accord did not understand until much later, in the long shaken years of rebuilding. The slow ship let the heart world live. It could have planted real shells at every panic vector the way it had planted them at the wall. It chose not to. It had herded 900 million minds into open flight, proved beyond any argument that it could end them. And then, having proved it, it lowered its slow guns and let them run. Because the Long Toll had not come 900 light-years to kill 900 million minds, it had come to be the worst nightmare of the Empire that laughed at it. And a nightmare does not need to kill you. It only needs to teach you, all the way down to the keel you do not have, that there is a thing in the dark you cannot outrun, and cannot outfold, and cannot make leave, and that it knows where you will run, and that it is patient, and that it could have, and that it chose not to. When the scattering was done, and the spire's fragments had fled into the deep, in a dozen broken directions, the Long Toll did not pursue. It came off its planted point one final time, brought its scarred, blunt face around, and resumed the original heading it had abandoned, only to herd the heart world, the slow straight line toward where the Cassock spire had been. 5 days out, then 4, coming on toward an empty throne, at the pace of a thing that has already won, and is simply walking the distance to make sure. On the 11th day, the slow human warship arrived at the boundary it had been crossing toward, since the first joke was filed, and there was no one left at the boundary to laugh. The Cassock spire was gone, not destroyed, the Accord would insist, in the long shaken records it kept afterward, but relocated, scattered, dispersed into a dozen distant deeps, where its broken fragments could begin the slow and unfamiliar work of rebuilding 900 million minds that had learned, in a single hour, the meaning of a word they had thrown away 4,000 years before. The word was patience. They had not known they would need it. They had sold it for speed, and speed had carried them everywhere fast and brought them nowhere safe. And now they sat in their scattered deeps and watched, on the long sensors, the slow ship arrive at the empty place where their certainty had been. The Long Toll planted itself one last time at the Veral boundary, in the open dark where the spire had hung for an age, and it did not fire, because there was nothing left to fire at. It simply sat there, dark and scarred and patient, in the place it had crossed 11 days of space to reach, and it held that place the way it had held every place, completely, as if it intended to hold it forever and might. 7 Ral, from a fragment world 1,000 light-years away, watched the contact go still at the boundary, and he understood at last the thing the Accord had been too fast to understand for 11 days. The slow ship had never been crawling toward the spire. It had been crawling toward this. Toward the moment the Accord would look at the empty place where its heart had been, and understand that the slow thing had not failed to catch them. It had simply taken its time, all the time it wanted, and arrived exactly when it meant to, at exactly the place it had named on the first day, and found the Empire already fled, and had not even needed to fire a killing shot to win. The fear had done that. The long toll had only had to be coming. A thing that is coming, and cannot be stopped from coming, does not need to arrive. 7 Ral did a thing then that no watch tier coordinator of the Accord had ever done. He pulled the very first record, the one he had filed on the first day, the classification he had laughed as he wrote, the one that named the contact a thing that is on its way, but will arrive too late to matter. He read it again. He had been so sure. He had been correct by every measure the Accord owned, and the Accord's measures had been wrong about the only thing that turned out to count, which was that mattering had never been about arriving in time. The slow ship mattered precisely because it would arrive at all, late or not, because lateness was meaningless to a thing you could not stop. He deleted nothing. He let the record stand, with its laughter in it, so that whoever came after him would see exactly how the wisest mind on the watch tier had looked at the worst nightmare of his civilization and called it a joke. On the bridge of the long toll, Inez Calloway took her hand off the helm plate for the first time in a very long while, and flexed her fingers, and felt the slow warship hang motionless in the dark around her. "We're here," she said. Captain Price stood at the rail and looked at the empty place on the forward glass, where an empire's heart had been when this began. He looked at it for a long time. There was no fleet to fight now, no wall, no throne. There was only the quiet, and the slow ship sitting in the middle of it, and the long sensors showing the scattered fragments of the Accord huddled in their distant deeps, watching, waiting to see what the nightmare would do now that it had arrived and found the bed empty. "We're here," Price agreed. He let out a breath that seemed to carry 60 years in it. And they ran. The whole Kasich Accord, 4,000 years of it, 900 million of them, and they looked at one slow ship that wouldn't turn around, and they ran so hard they tore their own heart loose to do it. He turned from the glass and looked at the bridge crew, at the young faces, and the old ones, at the gunners who had folded a wall one shell at a time, and the engineers who had let the hull take the lance fire of 800 ships, and not even roused the repair crews until it was over. He looked at Chief Armorer Bryn Vale, who had come up from the gun decks with forge soot still on his hands, and at the signal officer, and last at Inez Calloway, with her hand resting now, finally still, beside the helm. "Open a channel," he said. "Wide. Every band they can hear. I want the whole Accord to get this. Every fragment, every deep they've fled to." The signal officer opened the channel. The long toll, which had said almost nothing in 11 days, which had let the Quill's survivors and the Wall's survivors and the Spire's own panic do all its talking, finally spoke, in the low flat trade tongue, in Captain Price's quiet, unhurried voice. "This is the Monitor long toll," he said. "You laughed at us for being slow. You were right, we are slow. We will always be slow. We will be slow tomorrow and slow next year, and slow for as long as your people remember this. And we will still be here." He paused, and the pause was its own kind of weapon, the slow ship spending time the way it always did, making them wait, making them listen. You sold your patience to go fast, Price said. We kept ours. You can fold 1,000 light years in an hour, and it did not save you. Because we did not need to be fast. We only needed to be coming, and to never stop, and to be impossible to make leave. We aimed every shell at your heart worldwide on purpose. Count them if you doubt it. Not one of your 900 million is dead by our hand, and that was a choice, and we made it slowly, the way we make everything, so that you would have time to understand it was a choice. He let that settle, and then he finished. We will not chase your fragments. We will not hunt your scattered deeps. We do not need to. We will simply be here, at this boundary, slow and patient and impossible to move, for as long as it takes you to understand that a thing which cannot be outrun does not have to run. The galaxy is full of fast ships. There is only one of us that will not leave. Remember which one frightened you. Remember which one let you live. He closed the channel. The bridge was very quiet. Somewhere deep in the ship, the slow heart of the reactor beat its slow beat, and the scarred hull cooled, and the repair crews began, at last and in no hurry, to walk the long corridors toward the wounds the wall had bitten in the armor, with 11 days of patience, and no reason at all to rush. Brynvale wiped his hands on a cloth and went back below to read heat-off iron that no longer needed reading, because the work steadied him, and because a slow ship was a thing that was always tended and never finished. And that was a comfort in a galaxy that finished everything too fast. Inez Calloway looked at the empty dark where the cassock spire had been, and felt the thing she had been waiting 11 days to feel. And it was not triumph, and it was not the cold satisfaction she had thought it would be. It was relief. A long, slow, quiet relief. The kind that comes not from winning a thing, but from finally setting down a weight you have carried so long you forgot it was heavy. She thought of the man in the Corvette beside her, 14 years ago, who had run a half-second slower and died for it. She had carried that half-second the whole way here. She set it down now, in the quiet, in the empty dark at the throat of a fled empire. There was no half-second on the long toll. There was no race to be a half-second too slow for. There was only the place, and the holding of it, and the long quiet that came after, and for the first time since she was young she did not feel the dark behind her shoulder, waiting to be faster than her. The dark behind her shoulder was the slow ship now, and nothing in the galaxy was going to make it leave. She had flown fast ships once, and buried fast crews, and watched the galaxy be faster than her every time it mattered. She had stood in that long, cold room, young and angry, when the Navy gave up the race, and she had not understood it then. She had thought it was surrender. She understood it now, sitting still in the dark at the throat of a fled empire, in a slow ship that 900 light years of fast enemies had not been able to make turn around even once. The Navy had not surrendered the race. It had changed the contest. It had looked at a galaxy of fast ships, and understood that fast ships flee, and that a thing which flees can always be aimed at, and that the only ship in the universe that could not be aimed at was the one that would never leave. And it had built that ship, slow and ugly and solid all the way through, and it had dragged the ship across 11 days of open space to prove, to a laughing empire, the oldest and slowest truth the humans knew. You do not have to be the fastest thing in the dark. You only have to be the thing that does not stop coming, and does not run, and cannot be made to leave. Everything that can flee will, and you will be standing exactly where they flee to, slow and patient and unmovable, for as long as it takes. Captain Price came and stood beside her at the helm, the way he had on the first day, close but not touching, the captain beside the one pair of hands that moved the slow ship. "What's our heading, sailing master?" he asked, though there was nowhere left to go. Inez Calloway looked at the empty boundary, and at the long, quiet dark beyond it, and at the place where an empire had decided that slow meant harmless and learned, over 11 days, that it meant something else entirely. "No heading, sir," she said. "We're here. We stay here. We hold the place." Price nodded slowly. "We hold the place," he agreed, "until they understand, however long that takes." "However long," she said. And the long toll held the boundary, slow and dark and scarred and utterly still, in the empty dark where the laughter had been, and the Cassock Accord watched it from 1,000 distant deeps, and did not approach, because they had learned the one lesson the slow ship had crossed 900 light-years to teach, and it had cost them their certainty, and their wall, and their throne, and their pride to learn it. There is a thing in the dark that does not hurry, and does not chase, and does not run, and cannot be made to leave. It is slow. It will always be slow. And it is coming, at the pace of a thing that has already decided how the story ends, and is simply walking the distance to get there. In the years that followed, the Accord rebuilt itself in the scattered deeps, slowly, because it had finally learned that some things have no fast way to be done, and it kept, in its records, a single standing order that it never rescinded and never explained to its young, an order that the watch-tiers read at the start of every shift, the way they had once read the slow ship's distance for a laugh. The order was about a contact. It described a drive signature that was loud, where a good drive was quiet, and hot, where a good drive ran cold, and slow on purpose, with patience built into every meter of it. And the order said, in the cold, flat grammar of an empire that had finally learned the difference between fast and unstoppable, that if this signature were ever detected again, on any heading, at any distance, the correct response was not to laugh, and not to multiply, and not to build a wall, and not to flee. The correct response was to leave the place to it, quietly and at once, and never to be where it was going, and to be grateful, with whatever the Accord had that was nearest to gratitude, that the slow ship had let them live the first time, and had taught them, slowly and completely and without mercy, exactly what they had thrown away when they sold their patience to go fast. And far out at the Varel boundary, alone in the dark it had crossed 11 days to reach, the long toll held its place, and cooled its scars, and beat its slow heart, and waited, the way it would always wait, for nothing at all, and for everyone, slow and patient, and impossible to move, the worst nightmare of an empire that had laughed at it for being exactly what it always was. It never moved again. It never had to. The slow ship had won the only way it ever fought, by being somewhere, and refusing, forever, to be anywhere else. Tev Aramun, who had read the slow ship completely, and carried the only true understanding home, lived a long time after, and he spent the rest of his careful life doing a strange and quiet thing. He went among the fragments of the Accord, the scattered deeps where his people were learning, slowly and badly, how to be patient, and he told them the true story, not the story of the monster at the boundary, the story of the question. He told them that long ago, a people far away had lost every fast fight there was, and had sat in a long cold room, and had decided to stop running, and that everything the Accord feared at the Varel boundary had grown from that one decision in that one room. And he told them that the decision was not magic and not monstrous. It was only the thing a people does when it finally stops being afraid of being slow. He told them they could make the same decision if they chose, and that it would cost them everything they had built their souls on, and that it would be worth it, because at the end of it was the one thing the Accord had never once felt in 4,000 years of holy speed, which was the calm of a mind that is exactly where it means to be. Some of them listened. Most did not, At first, because the listening was slow and the accord still flinched at slow. But the fragments rebuilt over long years, and the long years did to the accord what no shell had done, which was to teach it patience by simply giving it nothing else to do. And here and there, in the scattered deeps, an accord ship would hold a position a little longer than it had to, would sit still through a fear that once would have sent it folding, would feel, for one strange unfamiliar moment, the floor that the slow people had found. It was not much. It was a beginning. It was the slow ship's last and quietest victory, the one it never fired a shell to win. Cale Brenner served on the long toll for 11 more years, and then he captained a monitor of his own, the fourth ship of the long cold decision, and he crewed it the way the sailing master had taught him, with the rare patient ones, the ones who could find the floor. He never hurried again. When his young ratings asked him how he stood the slowness, he told them what he had been told. On the third day of a crossing long ago, in a slow ship that had taught an empire to be afraid of standing still. He told them they were thinking about it wrong. He told them they were not waiting. He told them they were the only ones who had already arrived. It never moved again. It never had to. The slow ship had won the only way it ever fought, by being somewhere, and refusing, forever, to be anywhere else. And the galaxy, which was full of fast ships, learned to give the slow one all the room in the dark, and to speak of it quietly, and to never, ever, laugh at a thing for being slow again.